homestead law was clear. A single man could hold a claim for 3 years. But if the Territorial Review Board found that he had not made sufficient improvements, a house, a well, a cultivated field, and evidence of permanent settlement, the claim reverted to the government. The review board was coming on Friday. It was Tuesday. And the one thing Burke Scanlon did not have, the one thing that said permanent settlement louder than a house or a well or 40 acres of winter wheat, was a wife. He had a house. He had built it himself. 2 rooms of rough-cut pine, tight and square, with a stone chimney that drew well, and a porch that faced west, toward the Absaroka Range. He had a well. He had dug it by hand through 20 feet of clay and gravel until he hit water so cold and clean it made his teeth ache. He had 40 acres of wheat and a small herd of cattle, and a chicken coop, and a root cellar stocked with enough provisions to last the winter. What he did not have was a woman at the table, curtains in the windows, or any sign that the homestead was anything more than a bachelor camp with ambitions. The review board would see a single man on a lonely claim, and they would check the box that said insufficient evidence of permanent settlement, and Burke Scanlon would lose the land he had worked for 3 years, and there was nothing he could do about it, except find a wife by Friday. He rode into Elk Bend on Tuesday afternoon, with this problem sitting on his chest like a rock, and found a different problem sitting on the bench outside the general store. Her name was Thea Lindstrom. She was 28, Swedish-born, American-raised, and she was sitting on that bench with a carpet bag and a bruised look that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her circumstances. She had arrived in Elk Bend that morning on the mail coach from Billings, where she had been working as a seamstress in a dress shop that had burned down 3 days ago, taking her apartment above the shop with it. She had no job, no home, no family closer than a cousin in Minnesota who had not answered her last 2 letters, and she had $11 and a talent for sewing that was useless in a town that already had a seamstress. Burke did not know any of this when he saw her. What he knew was that she was sitting on a bench with a carpet bag and the expression of a woman who had run out of options and was trying to decide which direction to run next, and he knew that expression because he was wearing a version of it himself. He sat down on the other end of the bench. He was not a man who began conversations easily, but desperation has a way of loosening tongues. "I need a wife by Friday," he said. "Not a real wife. A wife who will sit at my table when the review board comes and make the homestead look like a home instead of a camp. I can offer room, board, and $40 when the review is done. After that, you are free to go." Thea Lindstrom looked at him. She had blue eyes that were direct in the Scandinavian way. No flirtation, no games, just a level assessment of the person in front of her and the situation on the table. "Are you a good man?" she asked. "I am a tired man. I have been on that land for 3 years, and I have put everything I have into it, and I will lose it in 3 days, because I do not have a woman at my table. I am not asking for a wife. I am asking for help." "Where would I sleep?" "The main room. I will sleep in the barn." "And after the review?" $40. "A ride to wherever you want to go. No obligation." Thea looked at her carpet bag. She looked at the $11 inside it. She looked at the man on the bench. Big, sunburned, calloused, with honest eyes and a jaw that was clenched with the effort of asking a stranger for help, which was clearly not something he did. "I will do it," she said, "but I have conditions. You do not touch me. You do not tell me what to wear, and you eat what I cook without complaining." Done. They rode to the homestead that afternoon. Thea sat on the buckboard beside him with her carpet bag on her lap and her spine straight, and they did not speak because they had nothing to say to each other yet, and neither of them was the kind of person who filled silence with noise. The homestead was better than she expected. The house was small but well built, with solid joints and a level floor, and the particular care that comes from a man who knows how to work with wood and takes pride in doing it right. The kitchen had a good stove and a pine table and 2 chairs and nothing on the walls and no curtains in the windows and no rug on the floor, and no evidence whatsoever that a woman had ever set foot in the place. "You were not exaggerating," Thea said. "This is a camp." "I told you." She set her carpet bag on the chair and looked around the room and said, I need fabric, a needle, a broom, and 3 days. Burke gave her the broom. He rode to the general store and bought fabric, whatever she told him to buy, which was a bolt of white muslin, and a bolt of blue gingham, and a spool of thread, and a packet of needles, and 2 pounds of lye soap. He brought it back, and set it on the table, and went to the barn and stayed there. Thea went to work. In 3 days she transformed the homestead. She scrubbed the floors until the pines shone. She washed the windows until they were clear. She sewed curtains, blue gingham, simple, clean, and hung them in every window. She made a rag rug from scraps of fabric she found in Burke's mending pile and laid it in front of the stove. She organized the pantry and polished the stove and set a jar of dried wildflowers on the table, and by Thursday evening, the house that had looked like a bachelor camp looked like a home. Burke came in from the barn at supper time and stood in the doorway and looked at what she had done, and his face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, gratitude, and something else that he turned away before she could name. He stopped. It looks like someone lives here. Someone does live here, Thea said. You live here. You just forgot to show it. She cooked supper. She cooked it from what he had in the pantry: salt pork and beans and biscuits and canned peaches. And she cooked it well, the way her mother had taught her in the kitchen in St. Paul before the family moved to Billings, with salt and care, and the particular attention that turns plain food into something worth sitting down for. They ate at the table with the gingham curtains in the windows, and the wildflowers in the jar, and the lamplight on the clean floor, and it looked, from the outside, exactly like what the review board needed to see: a married couple at supper in a settled home. From the inside, it looked like something else. It looked like 2 strangers discovering that they fit together at a table the way 2 boards fit at a joint. Not because anyone planned it, but because the grain ran the same direction. That night, after Burke went to the barn, Thea lay on the cot in the main room and listened to the fire settle and the wind move through the pines outside, and thought about what she had just done. She had sewn curtains for a stranger's house. She had scrubbed his floors and polished his stove and cooked his supper, and made his camp look like a home, and in doing it, she had felt something she had not felt since the dress shop burned: the deep, physical satisfaction of making a place better by being in it. She had been a seamstress for 6 years. She understood fabric and thread and the way a seam holds or fails. She understood that the strongest seams are the ones that look invisible, not because they are weak, but because they are so well made that they disappear into the hole. This arrangement with Burke was supposed to be a seam that showed, temporary, visible, meant to be taken out, but it did not feel temporary. It felt like the beginning of something she had not expected, and that frightened her because Thea Lindstrom was not a woman who was easily frightened. In the morning she found a cup of coffee on the porch rail, still warm. Burke was already in the field. She sat on the steps and drank the coffee, and watched the sun come up over the Absaroka range, and the light turn the wheat field gold, and she thought, he left me coffee. He did not knock. He did not disturb my sleep. He just left the coffee where I would find it. That is the kind of man he is. The review board came on Friday. 2 men from the territorial office, gray-suited and serious, with clipboards and questions. They walked the land and checked the improvements, and counted the cattle and inspected the house, and found a wife at the table, and curtains in the windows, and a rug on the floor, and a jar of wildflowers, and a pantry that was stocked and organized, and they checked every box and signed the paper, and the claim was Burke's. After they left, Burke sat at the table and put his hands flat on the wood and breathed out, long and slow, the way a man breathes when a weight he has been carrying for 3 years finally lifts. "It is done," he said. "It is done." He reached into his pocket and took out $40, 4 $10 gold pieces, and set them on the table in front of her. "The deal was $40 and a ride to wherever you want to go," he said. Thea looked at the money. She looked at the curtains she had sewn. She looked at the rug she had made. She looked at the stove she had polished, and the floor she had scrubbed, and the jar of wildflowers she had picked from the meadow behind the barn, and she thought about the $11 she had arrived with, and the dress shop that had burned, and the cousin in Minnesota who did not answer letters. "Burke," she said. "Yes. Where would I go?" He looked up. His eyes were careful and hopeful and afraid, the way the eyes of a man who does not want to presume but cannot help wanting. "I do not know," he said. "I do not want you to go. But that was not the deal, and I will not change the terms unless you ask me to." "I am asking." "What are you asking?" "I am asking to stay. Not for $40. Not for the review board. For—" She stopped. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not say things they cannot support with evidence. But the evidence was all around her. The curtains and the rug and the supper and the 3 days of work that had felt less like an obligation and more like a homecoming. "For the same reason you built this house with square joints and a level floor," she said. "Because some things deserve to be done right." Burke looked at the $40 on the table. He picked them up and put them back in his pocket. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, carefully, the way you handle something you are not sure you are allowed to touch, and said, "Then stay." She stayed. She stayed through the winter, sleeping in the main room, while Burke slept in the barn, because the terms had changed but the propriety had not. And Burke Scanlon was not a man who rushed the things that mattered. He built her a proper bed frame from maple he had been saving. She sewed him a new shirt from the leftover gingham. He brought her coffee in the mornings. She read to him in the evenings from a book of poems she had found at the bottom of her carpetbag, the one possession the fire had not taken. In January, a blizzard came down from the Absarokas and lasted 4 days, and the barn roof collapsed under the weight of the snow, and Burke carried his bedroll into the house and slept by the stove, and they were trapped together for the duration. And being trapped together was not a hardship. It was the opposite. It was the easiest 4 days of their lives. Burke told her about the claim, the 3 years of digging and plowing and building, the loneliness of winter nights when the wind sounded like something alive, and the nearest neighbor was 7 miles away. The morning he had finished the chimney and lit the first fire, and stood in the main room and thought, "This would be a good house if there were someone in it besides me." He told her about his family, a father who had been a shipbuilder in Maine, a mother who had died when he was 12, 2 brothers who had gone to California and not written. Thea told him about Sweden, not the Sweden she remembered because she had left at 4, but the Sweden her mother had described, the dark winters and the bright summers, and the smell of cardamom in her grandmother's kitchen, and the sound of the language she could still speak, but rarely did because there was no one to speak it to. She told him about the dress shop, and the 6 years of mending and altering and creating, and the fire that had taken it all in 20 minutes. The fabric, the patterns, the Singer sewing machine she had been paying off for 3 years, and the morning after, standing in the ash in her nightgown with nothing left but a carpet bag and $11 and a book of poems. Burke listened to all of this with his full attention, and when she was finished, he said, "I am sorry about the sewing machine. It was a good machine. I will buy you another one." She looked at him. "That was not in the arrangement." "The arrangement is over, Thea. The review board signed the paper. You can leave whenever you want. I am not talking about the arrangement. I am talking about a sewing machine, and I am talking about wanting to buy it for you because you lost yours, and because I can, and because—" He stopped. He rubbed his jaw. "Because I would like you to have a reason to stay that has nothing to do with $40. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the blizzard howled and the windows rattled and the fire popped, and the small house held them in its warmth like cupped hands. They played cards and talked and cooked and argued about whether the biscuits needed more salt. She said yes, he said no. They compromised on a pinch. And by the time the snow cleared, they had settled into a rhythm that was not the rhythm of 2 strangers sharing a house. It was the rhythm of 2 people who had found each other at the exact moment they needed to be found. "Thea," Burke said, on a Sunday morning in February, standing in the kitchen with his hat in his hands. "Yes, I built this house for a claim, but I would like to build it for you. I would like to add a room and a proper porch, and a real bedroom, and make it the kind of house you deserve. But I will only do it if you tell me this is your house too." She set down the coffee pot. "Burke Scanlon, I sewed those curtains in 3 days for a review board. If I were sewing them for myself, I would have used better fabric. So yes, add the room and build the porch and make it ours. And this time, I am picking the gingham." He laughed. He crossed the kitchen and took her hands, and they stood in the lamplight in the house she had turned from a camp into a home, and he said, "Will you marry me? For real this time?" "For real this time," she said. "Yes." They were married in March by the minister in Elk Bend, with the general store owner and his wife as witnesses. Thea wore a dress she had sewn herself. Not blue gingham, but white muslin with small blue flowers embroidered at the collar, because a wedding dress should have flowers even on the frontier. And Burke wore his good shirt, and when the minister said the words, they both smiled, because they had already said these words once, in a different building, for a different reason, and saying them again for the right reason was the sweetest thing either of them had ever done.